In the quiet, picturesque town of Ridgewood, known for its tree-lined streets and peaceful suburban life,
there lived a young boy named Jackson, who would soon find his life transformed by a secret that nobody saw coming.
This was a story of love, betrayal, and resiliency, a story that began on the day Jackson's father, Thomas Reed,
Was about to marry the woman who would change everything, Linda.
The year was 2005, and Jackson was only 5 years old when he lost his mother, Emily.
The pain of losing a loved one is hard to put into words, but for Jackson, the tragedy of his mother's death in a car accident was a heartbreak that left an indelible mark on his young heart.
Emily's passing shattered not only Jackson's world but also his father's. Thomas Reed had been deeply in love with Emily, and after her death he seemed to lose his direction.
The vibrant and passionate young man, who had once been full of dreams and aspirations, found himself a shell of his former self.
But in the midst of his grief, Thomas knew that he had one responsibility that couldn't be ignored: his son, Jackson.
Raising a child alone after the death of a spouse was no easy task. Thomas had to juggle his growing tech company, which had become highly successful, after he developed a dating app that quickly went viral, with his duties as a single parent. His work demands were high, but he did everything in his power to provide for Jackson, making sure that his son was loved and cared for. Still, there was always a lingering sadness in their home, a constant reminder of the life they had once had and lost. Despite the wealth and success that his business afforded him, Thomas never felt truly whole again.
Jackson, meanwhile, grew up without a clear memory of his mother, but the absence of a maternal figure weighed heavily on him. He often asked about Emily, asking his father to tell him stories about the woman he could barely remember.
Thomas would smile and share memories of her warmth and kindness, of the life they had built together. But as much as Thomas tried to fill the void for Jackson, he knew that something was missing from their Levessa mother's love, someone to guide Jackson in ways he couldn't.
For years, Thomas grappled with loneliness. He didn't actively date, and the thought of bringing another woman into their home felt wrong.
But as Jackson grew older, Thomas began to realize that he couldn't protect his son from the world forever. Jackson needed someone in his life who could help nurture him, someone who could take on the role of a mother figure.
Especially as Jackson began to ask more and more questions about his late mother.
After much deliberation, Thomas made the difficult decision to start dating again.
But how does one, after a decade of solitude, get back into the world of love?
Thomas had always been socially awkward, and dating felt like a daunting task. But he had an idea. Why not use the same dating app he had created to find someone? He felt more comfortable with the idea of meeting someone through technology, rather than in person. His app had changed countless lives, helping people find their soulmates.
And now it would hopefully help him find someone to share his life with.
Soon enough, he came across a profile that caught his eye.
The woman's name was Linda, and she was charming, caring, and seemed to be everything Thomas had been searching for. Her profile was filled with warm pictures, a friendly smile, and thoughtful descriptions of her hobbies and interests.
She seemed perfect. They quickly exchanged messages and began to meet for coffee and dinners. Over time, they developed a bond, and Thomas found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't with anyone since Emily. Linda was sweet and understanding.
She was patient with Jackson, even offering to help with his homework and spending time with him. Jackson, who had been initially cautious around her, began to warm up to Linda.
She took an interest in his life, asking about his favorite books, games, and even his memories of his mother.
Linda seemed to understand Jackson's needs in a way Thomas didn't expect. She was the type of person who listened, who made others feel seen and heard. Despite the outward perfection of their relationship, Jackson began to feel uneasy. He didn't quite understand why, but something about Linda didn't sit right with him.
His instincts, though unrefined at his young age, told him that Linda wasn't being entirely truthful. There were moments when her smile seemed a little too rehearsed, her laughter a little too forced.
Jackson observed her when she didn't think anyone was looking, and what he saw worried him.
Linda had a boyfriend, Aaron.
Jackson didn't know much about him, but he could tell from the way Linda behaved when they were alone
that her feelings for Aaron were more than just friendly. She would speak to him on the phone late at night, her voice lowering to a whisper, as if hiding something.
Jackson often overheard snippets of these conversations.
What caught his attention the most were the words he heard. Once we're married.
We'll have everything we need, and he's so gullible. He won't know the difference. Jackson didn't fully understand, but he knew something wasn't right.
Linda didn't care about his father the way she acted.
She had ulterior motives. For weeks, Jackson wrestled with what he should do. He didn't want to get Linda into trouble, but he knew he had to do something.
One day, while Linda was on the phone with Erin, Jackson overheard enough to confirm his worst fears.
They were planning to take over his father's company and eventually push Jackson out of the picture. They even spoke about how easy it would be to get rid of him once they were married, as if he were nothing more than an obstacle.
Fear gripped Jackson's heart.
He didn't want to lose his father, and he certainly didn't want to lose the life he had. So he did the only thing he could think of. He decided to take action. Jackson had seen his father use a smartphone many times, and he had even played games on it when his father was busy.
The phone had a recording function, and Jackson knew this could be the key to revealing Linda's true intentions. He spent days observing Linda and Erin, waiting for the perfect moment to gather the evidence he needed.
And then, one evening, as Linda and Erin sat on the couch discussing their plans, Jackson saw his chance. With shaking hands, he grabbed the phone from the table, carefully turned it on, and began recording.
His heart pounded in his chest as he crouched behind the couch, trying to stay hidden. Linda and Erin continued to talk, unaware that their words were being captured.
"He'll handle Thomas. He trusts me, and he's so blinded by grief.
That hell let me do whatever I want," Linda said, her voice smooth and confident.
"And Jackson, he's just a kid.
He won't be a problem once we're married."
"Well, send him away. The less he knows, the better," Erin added, laughing darkly. Jackson's stomach churned as he listened to the conversation. He didn't understand all the details, but he knew enough to realize that Linda and Erin had no intention of keeping him or his father in their lives. They only wanted his father's wealth and power, and Jackson was nothing more than a hurdle to overcome.
That night, Jackson stayed up late, unsure of what to do next.
He was terrified of what would happen if he told his father. What if Linda denied everything? What if Erin threatened them both? But Jackson couldn't just sit back and do nothing.
He had to protect his father, and he had to expose the truth.
The next day, as the wedding approached, Jackson took the phone and showed it to Thomas.
His hands trembled as he handed the phone to his father, and as Thomas watched the recordings, his face shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to anger. For the first time in years, Thomas felt his heart race not from excitement about the wedding,
but from the realization that the woman he had trusted had been plotting behind his back all along. Without wasting another second, Thomas called the police.
He knew what he had to do, and there was no going back. He couldn't allow Linda and Erin to destroy everything he had built.
The wedding day arrived, and Ridgewood was abuzz with excitement. The park was decorated with white flowers, and the guests were seated, eagerly awaiting the ceremony.
But there was no joy in Thomas's heart. As he stood at the altar, waiting for Linda to arrive, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that weighed heavily on his chest. As Linda walked down the aisle, her smile wide and radiant, Jackson could see the deceit in her eyes.
He didn't trust her. He didn't want her there.
But he also knew that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment his father would finally learn the truth. Thomas didn't say a word as Linda reached the altar.
Instead, he pulled out the phone and played the recordings for everyone to hear. The guests fell silent as Linda's betrayal was exposed for all to see. She tried to explain herself, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The police arrived shortly after, and Linda and Erin were taken away in handcuffs. It was over.
Linda's scheme had crumbled, and Jackson's family was safe.
In the aftermath of the scandal, life slowly returned to normal.
Thomas and Jackson were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives.
But the bond between them grew stronger than ever. Jackson had proven that, no matter what, he would always protect his father. And together, they would face whatever challenges came their way.
They didn't need anyone else, they had each other.